The night I saw my sister's phone on my pillow, a clear case, pressed lavender wilting under the lamplight, I realized the air in my hotel room had turned to glass shards. Not that Grant would notice. He was too busy pretending he heard a cat in our spotless kitchen, his voice bending with every lie. Before we dive deeper into the story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Meredith, you there? Grant's pixelated face flickered on my laptop screen, his left hand tugging at his hair. Classic tell. He'd done that same nervous gesture when he'd forgotten our anniversary, 3 years running, when he'd maxed out our credit card on that ridiculous gaming setup, when he'd sworn he'd deleted his dating apps after we got married. I'm here, I said, my voice steady as surgical steel. Just tired. Close the Morrison account today. 2.5 million. That's great, babe. He wasn't listening. His eyes kept darting left, toward what I knew was our bedroom doorway. Listen, I think we might have mice or something. Keep hearing these weird scratching sounds. Scratching sounds. Right. Because my sister Audrey had always been a scratcher when she was nervous. Fingernails on fabric, on skin, on whatever surface was handy. I'd watched her destroy 3 throw pillows during our parents' divorce proceedings. I picked up the phone, her phone, and turned it over in my hands. The lavender was definitely hers. She'd been pressing flowers since we were kids, claiming it was therapeutic. What was therapeutic about sleeping with your sister's husband, I wondered. Maybe she'd press a few daisies to commemorate the occasion. Maybe you should call an exterminator, I suggested, watching Grant's face carefully. You know how much I hate pests in the house. Yeah, maybe. Another hair tug. When did you say you were coming home? Thursday night, remember? The red eye. But I was already pulling up airline websites on my phone, booking a Wednesday morning flight. If Grant wanted to play house with my baby sister, he could do it on his own time. Not mine. Right, Thursday, cool. I'll probably just crash early tonight, you know. Been working late all week. Working late, in our bedroom, with my sister. How industrious of him. Sweet dreams, Grant. I ended the call before he could respond. The hotel room felt smaller now, the city lights outside my window blurring into abstract smears of gold and red. Denver was beautiful at night, but I couldn't appreciate it. Not when my entire life was imploding 2 states away. I'd built everything carefully. The house with its perfect suburban lawn, the marriage that looked flawless from the outside, the career that finally proved I was more than just the middle daughter who never quite measured up to golden child Audrey. I'd worked 60-hour weeks to afford that house, negotiated every detail of the mortgage myself because Grant's credit was shot from his entrepreneurial phase. I'd painted every room, planted every flower, chosen every piece of furniture. And now Audrey, beautiful, free-spirited, can't hold a job Audrey, was rolling around on my Egyptian cotton sheets with my husband. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent my whole life being the responsible one, while Audrey floated through existence like a dandelion seed, landing wherever the wind took her. She'd never had to work for anything. Men fell over themselves to help her. Employers gave her chance after chance. Our parents bailed her out of every financial disaster with indulgent smiles. But this was different. This was mine. I opened my laptop and started typing an email to my assistant. Change of plans, moving my Thursday meetings to Friday. Family emergency. Not technically a lie. Grant's impending castration definitely qualified as a family emergency. My phone buzzed. A text from Audrey. Miss you, sis. Can't wait to catch up when you get home. The audacity was breathtaking. I had to admire it, in a twisted way. She was texting me from my own house, probably from my own bed, after screwing my husband, and she was using heart emojis. I screenshotted the message. Evidence. Not for court. I wasn't planning to drag this through the legal system like some daytime TV drama. No, This was for something much more satisfying. See, Grant had always underestimated me. He saw the suburban housewife, the woman who brought casseroles to neighborhood potlucks, and remembered everyone's birthdays. He didn't see the woman who'd closed million-dollar deals by finding her clients' pressure points and applying just the right amount of force. He was about to get an education. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Eleanor's number. Grant's mother, the Ice Queen herself, president of our homeowners association, and self-appointed guardian of neighborhood morality. Eleanor, who'd never quite thought I was good enough for her precious son, who made passive-aggressive comments about my career keeping me away from home too much. It was nearly midnight, but Eleanor was a chronic insomniac. She'd be awake, probably reading one of her historical romance novels, and judging the heroines for their lack of proper breeding. The phone rang twice before her crisp voice answered. "Meredith, is everything all right?" "Hi, Eleanor. I'm so sorry to call so late, but I wanted to surprise Grant. I'm flying home early, and I was hoping you and Walter might join us for lunch tomorrow. Say, 1 o'clock? A pause. Eleanor loved surprises almost as much as she loved being included in family drama. "How lovely, dear. We'd be delighted. Should I bring anything?" "Just yourselves. Oh, and Eleanor, could you do me a tiny favor and not mention this to Grant? I want it to be a complete surprise." "Of course, dear. How thoughtful of you." Thoughtful. That was me. Next call, my mother. Lorraine picked up on the first ring, which meant she'd been awake scrolling through Facebook, looking for drama in other people's lives. She was about to get front row seats to some grade A chaos. "Meredith, sweetheart, it's so late. Is everything okay?" "Everything's perfect, Mom. I'm coming home early to surprise Grant, and I wanted to invite you and Dad to lunch tomorrow. 1 o'clock. Can you make it?" "Oh, how wonderful. Your father will be so pleased. He was just saying how we never see you two anymore. Should I make my famous potato salad?" "That would be perfect. But, Mom, it's a surprise, so don't call the house, okay?" "My lips are sealed, honey. Oh, this is so exciting." Exciting was one word for it. I hung up and leaned back against the hotel pillows, already planning my next moves. Grant thought he was so clever, waiting until I was out of town to bring Audrey over. He probably figured he had the whole week to play out his little fantasy before I came home, none the wiser. He'd always been terrible at chess, never could think more than one move ahead, but I'd been playing this game my whole life, watching from the sidelines as Audrey collected admirers and accolades while I did the actual work. I'd learned patience, strategy, the art of the long game, and tomorrow, all those lessons were going to pay off. I closed my laptop and headed for the shower. I had an early flight to catch, and I wanted to look perfect for lunch. After all, it wasn't every day you got to watch your entire world explode in front of an audience. "Thursday night," I said to my reflection in the bathroom mirror. "Don't wait up, honey." The Denver airport at 6 a.m. was a special kind of purgatory, filled with business travelers clutching coffee-like lifelines and families beginning vacations with the kind of forced cheer that would crumble by hour 2. I sat at my gate, watching a toddler have a meltdown over a dropped cookie, and thought about how much Grant hated early mornings. He'd probably still be in bed, maybe with Audrey curled up beside him on my side of the mattress. The thought should have made me sick, but instead, I felt something colder, sharper. Anticipation. My phone buzzed with a text from Grant. "Morning, babe. Hope your meetings go well today. Love you." Love you, right. I wondered if he'd practiced that lie in the mirror, or if it just rolled off his tongue naturally now. I typed back, "Thanks, honey. Long day ahead. Probably won't be able to talk much." True enough. I'd be busy orchestrating his social destruction. The flight to Colorado Springs was mercifully short, and I'd rented a car in advance, something Grant didn't know about since I'd used my personal credit card. By 10 a.m., I was driving through our neighborhood, past the perfectly manicured lawns and identical mailboxes that had once represented everything I'd wanted. Maple Grove Estates, where dreams came to die behind white picket fences. I parked 3 blocks away and called Eleanor back. Meredith, dear, we're so looking forward to lunch. Walter's even wearing his good shirt. About that, Eleanor, would you mind if we made it a surprise party? I was thinking we could all arrive together, really catch Grant off guard. Oh, how delightful. Walter does love a good surprise. Should we meet somewhere first? Perfect. How about the Starbucks on Elm, 11:30? We'll be there. I could practically hear her rubbing her hands together with glee. Eleanor lived for moments like this, opportunities to be the center of attention while maintaining plausible deniability about her motives. Next, I called my parents. Dad, it's me. Listen, about lunch today, would you mind meeting me first? I want to coordinate the surprise. Of course, sweetheart. Your mother's been cooking since dawn. She made enough potato salad to feed a small army. That's perfect, Dad. Meet me at the Starbucks on Elm at 11:30, okay? And Dad? Make sure Mum doesn't post anything on Facebook until after, okay? You know how she gets with social media. A chuckle. I'll hide her phone if I have to. By 11:15, I was sitting in my car outside Starbucks, watching both sets of parents arrive. Eleanor stepped out of Walter's pristine Mercedes, wearing what I recognized as her special occasion pearls. My parents emerged from their sensible Honda, Mum clutching a covered dish that was definitely larger than any reasonable potato salad required. This was going to be beautiful. I walked into the coffee shop and waved them over to a corner table. Thank you all so much for doing this. Grant's going to be so surprised. He's been working so hard lately, Eleanor said, stirring her latte with the kind of precision she applied to everything. Staying up late every night, I can hear his computer running when we drive by. His computer? Sure. He has been putting in long hours, I agreed. I think he'll really appreciate having family around. Walter nodded approvingly. He'd always liked me, mostly because I was the first woman Grant had dated who didn't require financial bailouts every few months. It's good to see you prioritizing family time, Meredith. Career success is important, but marriage comes first. If only he knew. Absolutely, I said. In fact, I think today might be a real turning point for Grant and me. Mom reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so glad you're making an effort. Marriage takes work, you know. Your father and I have had our rough patches, but we always worked through them. Rough patches, like the time Dad forgot their anniversary, or when Mom went through her brief obsession with line dancing. Not quite the same as finding your spouse in bed with your sister, but I appreciated the sentiment. Should we head over? I asked, checking my watch. I want to make sure we catch him at the perfect moment. We caravanned to my house. My house, I reminded myself, since my name was the only one on the deed, with me leading the way and both sets of parents following behind like some sort of suburban funeral procession. I could see Mrs. Patterson from across the street, peeking through her blinds as we pulled into the driveway. The neighborhood watch was in full effect. Perfect. The more witnesses, the better. I gathered everyone on the front porch, key in hand. Okay, remember, it's a surprise. Let's all go in together and really catch him off guard. Eleanor practically vibrated with excitement. Walter looked bemused but game. My parents exchanged one of those married couple looks that said they weren't entirely sure what was happening but were along for the ride. I unlocked the front door and gestured everyone inside. The house was quiet, which meant Grant and Audrey were probably still upstairs. Excellent. Grant, I called out, my voice carrying through the house. Honey, I'm home early. Silence. Then, faintly, the sound of scrambling from upstairs. Whispered voices, a door closing. I smiled at our parents. He must be taking a shower. Why don't we head up and surprise him? Should we wait downstairs? Mom asked, ever the polite guest. Nonsense, Eleanor said, already heading for the stairs. We're family. We trooped up the stairs like some sort of dysfunctional parade, me in the lead, both mothers flanking me, both fathers bringing up the rear. I could hear more movement from behind the bedroom door now, urgent whispers, the sound of someone stumbling. At the top of the stairs, I paused, my hand on the bedroom door handle. This was it, the moment everything changed. "Grant," I called out sweetly, "I brought some special guests to see you." I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The scene that greeted us was even better than I'd imagined. Grant shirtless and panicked, trying to pull on his jeans while hopping on one foot. Audrey, wrapped in my favorite silk robe, frozen like a deer in headlights beside my bed, with her hair tousled and her makeup smeared. For a moment, nobody moved. It was like a tableau from some twisted suburban art installation. Betrayal in Egyptian cotton. Then Eleanor gasped. Mom dropped her potato salad. Walter said, "Jesus Christ, Grant." And I smiled. "Surprise," I said. The silence stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Grant's face cycled through a fascinating array of expressions: shock, panic, embarrassment, and finally, predictably, anger. Because, of course, this was somehow my fault. "Meredith," he started, still struggling with his jeans, "this isn't what it looks like." I had to give him credit for commitment to the cliché. "Really? Because it looks like my sister is wearing my robe in my bedroom while you're half naked. But please, enlighten us about what it actually is." Audrey finally found her voice. "Mer, I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can." I stepped further into the room, our parents clustering behind me like some sort of dysfunctional Greek chorus. "You always were good at explanations. Remember when you explained how you accidentally spent my college fund on that pottery class in Sedona? That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed, and even I was surprised by how sharp it sounded. "You want to talk about fair?" "Fair would have been telling me you were screwing my husband instead of texting me heart emojis from my own house." Eleanor had gone completely white, her pearls clutched in one hand like a rosary. Walter looked like he wanted to disappear into the hardwood floors. My father's jaw was clenched so tight I was worried about his dental work, but Mom was warming up for a performance. "Audrey Marie Thompson," she said, using the full name that had struck fear into our hearts as children. "What in the hell do you think you're doing?" "Lorraine, please," Dad said quietly, but Mum was just getting started. "Don't you Lorraine please me, Charles. Our daughter, is standing here in her sister's bedroom, wearing God knows what under that robe, and you want me to be quiet?" Grant finally got his jeans zipped and seemed to think this gave him some sort of authority in the situation. "Everyone just needs to calm down. We can discuss this like adults." "Adults?" Walter spoke for the first time since his initial profanity, and his voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. "Adults don't sneak around behind their wives' backs, son. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." I walked over to my dresser and picked up Audrey's phone, the one I'd found the night before. "You thought you were so clever, waiting until I was out of town. But you forgot something, Grant. You forgot that I'm actually smart." I held up the phone. "Audrey left this on my pillow last night. Her phone, with the pressed flower case that she's had since high school. Either she's developed teleportation abilities, or she's been here all week." Audrey's face crumpled. "Mer, please, let me explain. It just happened." "It just happened? What? Did you trip and fall onto my husband's dick?" "Meredith," Mom gasped, but I was beyond caring about language. "No, Mom. I'm done being polite. I'm done pretending that Audrey's just misunderstood, or that she can't help the way she is. She made a choice. They both did." I turned to Grant, who was now fully dressed but still looked like he wanted to crawl under the bed. "How long?" "Meredith, please." "How long?" He ran his hands through his hair, that nervous gesture that had once seemed endearing. "A few months." "A few months." I nodded slowly. "So, when I was working those 18-hour days to close the Morrison account, you were here with my sister. When I was in Phoenix for the Williams presentation, when I was in Denver this week, you were playing house." "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like, Grant? Enlighten us. Tell us how screwing your wife's sister in her own bed isn't exactly what it looks like." Eleanor finally found her voice. "Grant Michael Patterson, I have never been so ashamed in my entire life. Grant's face flushed red. Mom, you don't understand the situation. I understand that I raised a man who apparently has no concept of honor or decency, she snapped. And in front of guests. The humiliation. Of course, Eleanor would make this about her own embarrassment, but for once, her self-centeredness was working in my favor. Audrey was crying now, ugly sobs that made her mascara run in black streaks down her cheeks. Mer, please, I never meant for it to happen. I was just so lonely, and Grant was so sweet. Sweet? I stared at her. He's my husband, Audrey. My husband. There are literally billions of other men on this planet, and you chose mine. You're never here, she exploded, finally showing some fire. You're always working, always traveling, always putting your career first. Grant was lonely too. The room went silent. Even the sound of traffic from outside seemed to fade away. I walked over to my sister slowly, deliberately. When I was close enough to see the flecks of gold in her tear-filled eyes, I spoke very quietly. Get out of my house. Get out of my house, get out of my robe, and get out of my life. You can't mean that. Try me. Audrey looked around the room desperately, seeking an ally. Mom was still clutching her purse like a weapon. Dad looked like he was contemplating violence. Eleanor and Walter were staring at their son with expressions of pure disappointment. No help was coming. Fine, she whispered, but this isn't over. Oh, honey, I said, smiling for the first time since I'd walked into the room. It hasn't even started. She grabbed her clothes from the floor and fled to the bathroom to change. Grant started to follow her, but Walter grabbed his arm. I think you've done enough, don't you? Grant shook him off and turned to me. Meredith, we need to talk, alone. No, I don't think we do. I think we're way past talking. This is my house too. Actually, it's not. I pulled out my phone and scrolled to my photos, finding the one I'd taken of the deed last year when we'd refinanced. See this? This is the deed to this house. Notice whose name is on it? Mine, just mine. Because your credit was so bad that the bank wouldn't even consider you as a co-signer. Grant's face went from red to white. You can't just kick me out. Watch me. I walked to the bedroom window and opened it wide. Then I went to Grant's dresser and started pulling out clothes, tossing them onto the lawn below. Shirts, pants, underwear, everything went flying. What the hell are you doing? Grant lunged for me, but Dad stepped between us. I'd think very carefully about your next move, son, Dad said quietly. Grant looked around the room one more time, taking in the faces of everyone who had once respected him. Then he pushed past us all and thundered down the stairs. I followed him to the front door, our parents trailing behind like the world's most uncomfortable entourage. On the porch, Grant turned back to me. This isn't over, Meredith. I smiled and pulled his car keys from my pocket. I'd grabbed them from the kitchen counter on our way upstairs. With a perfect overhand throw, I sent them sailing into Mrs. Patterson's koi pond across the street. Yes, I said, it is. Grant stared at the pond, then at me, then at the growing crowd of neighbors who had emerged to watch the show. Mrs. Patterson was filming everything on her phone. The Johnsons from next door were standing on their porch with coffee mugs, not even pretending they weren't enjoying the drama. You'll pay for this, Grant said, but his voice lacked conviction. Oh, honey, I replied, I already have. Now it's your turn. He looked like he wanted to say more, but Eleanor stepped forward. Grant, I think you should leave. Now. The dismissal from his own mother was the final blow. Grant's shoulders sagged, and he walked away down the street, presumably to call an Uber, since his keys were now decorating the bottom of a fish pond. Audrey emerged from the house a few minutes later, dressed but disheveled, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't look at anyone as she hurried to her car. As she drove away, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. Well, Mom said finally, I guess we won't be needing that potato salad. And despite everything, I started to laugh. By evening, the story had spread through Maple Grove Estates like wildfire through dry grass. My phone buzzed constantly with texts from neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, all pretending to check in while fishing for details. Heard there was some excitement at your place today. Hope everything's okay? Sarah from the book club. Girl, Mrs. Patterson's video is everywhere. You okay? My friend Tina, who never sugarcoated anything. Meredith, dear, if you need anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask. Mrs. Chen from 2 houses down, who probably just wanted confirmation of the rumors. I was sitting on my back patio with a glass of wine, watching the sunset over the neighborhood that would never look at me the same way again when Tina called. Okay, I need the full story, she said without preamble. Because Mrs. Patterson's video only shows Grant fishing his keys out of a pond while you stand on the porch looking like a vengeful goddess. That's pretty much the full story. Bullshit. Nobody throws car keys into a fish pond without serious provocation. What did he do? I took a sip of wine and considered my options. Tina had been my best friend since college, and she'd never liked Grant. She'd called him aggressively mediocre at my wedding, which had seemed harsh at the time, but now felt prophetic. I caught him with Audrey. Silence. Then, your sister Audrey? Golden child, yoga instructor, can't keep a job, Audrey? That's the one. In your house? In my bed. Oh, Tina's voice went quiet. What do you need me to do? I can be there in an hour with a shovel and an alibi. Despite everything, I smiled. I think I've got it handled. Are you sure? Because I've been waiting years for an excuse to destroy that smug piece of Tina. Right, sorry. What's your plan? I looked out at the neighborhood, at the houses where people were probably still talking about the afternoon's entertainment. I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly what kind of man Grant Patterson really is. I like where this is heading. Tomorrow's the monthly HOA meeting. Eleanor's been president for 3 years, but her support has been shaky lately. People are tired of her micromanaging the mailbox colors and fining people for having their trash cans visible from the street. And now her son's been publicly humiliated for cheating on his wife with her sister. Exactly. Eleanor's whole authority comes from her image as the moral center of the neighborhood. That image just took a pretty significant hit. You're going to destroy them both. I'm going to let them destroy themselves. I'm just going to make sure everyone has front row seats. The next morning, I made my first strategic move. I walked to the mailbox in my running clothes, timing it perfectly to coincide with the neighborhood's morning dog walking rush. Mrs. Patterson was out with her ancient beagle. The Johnsons were walking their golden retriever, and 3 other neighbors were clustered near the community bulletin board. Meredith, Mrs. Patterson called out, her voice dripping with false sympathy. How are you holding up, dear? I'm doing well, thank you. It's actually been quite liberating. The group exchanged glances. Liberating wasn't the response they'd expected. It must have been such a shock, Mrs. Johnson said, her eyes bright with curiosity. Not really, I replied casually, stretching my hamstrings against the mailbox. I've known for a while that Grant wasn't the man I married. Yesterday just confirmed it. But your sister, Mrs. Patterson started. Audrey's always taken whatever she wanted without considering the consequences. I suppose I should have seen this coming. I shrugged. At least now I know exactly who I can trust. I jogged away before they could ask more questions, leaving them to dissect that conversation for the rest of the morning. That afternoon, I made my second move. I called Ms. Davis, the divorce attorney Tina had recommended. I need to move quickly, I told her during our consultation. My husband doesn't know I'm filing yet, and I want to make sure all my assets are protected. Ms. Davis was a sharp woman in her 40s, with steel-grey hair and the kind of direct gaze that probably made opposing counsel nervous. Tell me about your financial situation. The house is in my name only. We have a joint checking account with about $15,000, joint savings with $30,000, and separate retirement accounts. I make about 3 times what he does. Any children? No. Infidelity. With my sister, I have witnesses. Ms. Davis smiled for the first time since I'd walked into her office. This should be fairly straightforward. Colorado is a no-fault divorce state, but infidelity can still impact asset division, especially when it comes to marital misconduct. How quickly can we move? I can have papers drawn up by tomorrow. How do you want to serve him? I thought about Grant, probably staying at some cheap motel, trying to figure out his next move. I want to serve him at the HOA meeting tomorrow night, in front of everyone. Ms. Davis raised an eyebrow. That's unconventional. Grant's always cared more about his image than anything else. I want to make sure everyone sees exactly what he's lost. I like your style. That evening, I made my third move. I invited 6 of the neighborhood women over for coffee, carefully selected for their influence and their tendency to share information. I wanted to thank you all for your support, I told them as we sat in my living room, the same room where Grant and I had hosted Christmas parties and game nights. Yesterday was difficult, but I'm grateful to know who my real friends are. We're here for you, said Margaret from 3 houses down. What Grant did was unforgivable. And with your own sister, added Linda from the corner house, I can't even imagine. The worst part, I said, taking a delicate sip of coffee, is that this has been going on for months. While I was working to support us both, they were carrying on right here in my home. The women exchanged shocked glances. I just confirmed what they'd all been speculating about. Months, Margaret gasped. I found evidence going back to February. Text messages, receipts, photos. I shook my head sadly. I should have seen it sooner, but I trusted them both. What will you do now? Linda asked. I'm filing for divorce, of course, and I'm putting the house on the market. You're leaving Maple Grove? I think it's time for a fresh start, somewhere Grant and Audrey can't find me. By the time the women left, I knew the story would be all over the neighborhood within hours. Grant wasn't just a cheater. He was a long-term, calculated betrayer who had driven his innocent wife away from her home. Perfect. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a bland building that hosted everything from neighborhood watch meetings to children's birthday parties. I arrived early, taking a seat in the back row where I could see everyone without being too conspicuous. Eleanor called the meeting to order at 7 p.m. sharp, but her usual commanding presence seemed diminished. She kept glancing at the door, probably hoping Grant wouldn't show up. He did, of course. Grant slipped in halfway through the treasurer's report, looking haggard and defensive. He'd clearly been staying somewhere without laundry facilities because his shirt was wrinkled and his hair was unwashed. When Eleanor called for new business, I stood up. I have something to share with everyone, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room. Eleanor's face went pale. Meredith, I don't think this is the appropriate venue. I think the neighborhood has a right to know what kind of people are representing them in leadership positions. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at me, and I could feel the weight of their attention like a physical force. Yesterday, I discovered that my husband has been having an affair with my sister for the past several months, in my home, while I was traveling for work to support our household. Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Eleanor looked like she wanted to disappear into the floor. I'm sharing this because I believe in transparency and accountability. The Patterson family has held positions of authority in this community for years, and I think everyone deserves to know what their moral leadership actually looks like. Grant shot to his feet. You can't do this here. Actually, I can. I nodded to Ms. Davis, who had been waiting by the door. She walked forward and handed Grant a manila envelope. Grant Patterson, you're being served with divorce papers. The room erupted. People were talking over each other, craning their necks to see Grant's reaction, pulling out phones to record the drama. Eleanor was frantically banging her gavel, trying to restore order. Grant ripped open the envelope, his face cycling through shock, anger, and panic as he scanned the documents. This is harassment, he shouted over the noise. No, I said calmly. "This is consequences." I walked out of the community center with my head high, leaving behind a room full of chaos and a husband who finally understood that he'd underestimated the wrong woman. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The neighborhood group chat was on fire. Eleanor had resigned as HOA president, and Grant had apparently been asked to leave his motel for disturbing other guests. I made coffee, sat on my patio, and started planning my next move. Because this was just the beginning. The divorce proceedings moved faster than I'd expected, mostly because Grant seemed to be in a state of perpetual panic and kept making terrible decisions. His first mistake was hiring Bradley Morrison, a lawyer whose main qualifications seemed to be a cheap suit and a willingness to take cases on payment plans. My second meeting with Ms. Davis was far more productive than Grant's legal strategy sessions appeared to be. "He's trying to claim emotional distress," she told me, sliding a copy of Grant's counterfiling across her desk. "Says you humiliated him publicly and damaged his reputation." I laughed. "He damaged his own reputation when he decided to sleep with my sister." "That's essentially what we'll argue. He's also requesting spousal support." "On what grounds?" "He claims he's been financially dependent on you and needs time to rebuild his life after the trauma of your marriage ending." The audacity was breathtaking. The trauma of our marriage ending? He's the one who ended it when he started screwing my sister. Again, that's our argument. The good news is that Colorado doesn't typically award spousal support in cases of marital misconduct, especially when the marriage was relatively short and both parties are capable of working. What about the house? Since it's in your name only and you can prove you made all the payments, it's separate property. He has no claim to it. And the joint accounts. We'll split those 50-50 minus any funds he spent on his affair. If you can prove he used marital money to wine and dine your sister, we can recoup that. I pulled out a folder I'd prepared. Restaurant receipts, hotel charges, jewelry purchases, all from our joint credit card. He wasn't exactly subtle about it. Ms. Davis flipped through the documents, her expression growing more satisfied with each page. "This is excellent." He essentially documented his own misconduct. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for the following week. I spent the intervening days gathering evidence and preparing for what I knew would be Grant's attempt to paint me as a cold, career-obsessed wife who drove him into another woman's arms. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully in a navy blue suit that said, "Professional but not intimidating," paired with the pearl earrings Grant had given me for our first anniversary. I wanted to look like the wronged wife, not the vengeful ex. Grant showed up looking like he'd slept in his car, which he might have, given his recent housing situation. Bradley Morrison looked barely old enough to have passed the bar exam and kept dropping papers. Judge Patricia Hendricks was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who clearly had no patience for marital drama. She listened to both sides present their opening arguments with the expression of someone who'd heard it all before. Morrison went first, painting a picture of Grant as a neglected husband who'd made a terrible mistake, but deserved compassion and financial support during his difficult transition. "Your Honor, my client was married to a woman who prioritized her career over their relationship. She was frequently absent, emotionally unavailable, and contributed to the breakdown of their marriage through her neglect. I had to admire the strategy, even if it made me want to throw something." Ms. Davis stood up for my response. "Your Honor, the respondent is attempting to blame his wife for his own decision to commit adultery with her sister. Mrs. Patterson worked hard to support their household, while Mr. Patterson pursued various failed business ventures. Her success is being used against her in an attempt to justify his betrayal." "Let's hear the evidence," Judge Hendricks said dryly. What followed was 2 hours of the most surreal experience of my life. Grant's lawyer tried to argue that my work travel had created an environment that encouraged infidelity. My lawyer countered with the credit card statements showing Grant had spent over $3,000 on his affair including a weekend getaway to Aspen that he'd told me was a work conference. The turning point came when Morrison called Grant to testify. "Mr. Patterson, can you describe the state of your marriage prior to the incident in question?" Grant cleared his throat nervously. Meredith was always working. She'd be gone for days at a time, sometimes weeks. I felt like I was married to a ghost. "And how did this affect you emotionally?" "I was lonely, depressed. I started to feel like she didn't care about our marriage at all." "And when did you first encounter Mrs. Patterson's sister?" "Audrey started coming around more often when Meredith was traveling. She was going through a rough patch, and I was trying to be supportive." "How did your relationship with Audrey develop?" Grant shifted uncomfortably. "It started as friendship. She understood what I was going through. She was there when Meredith wasn't." "When did it become physical?" "I don't think that's relevant." "Answer the question, Mr. Patterson." "February, but it wasn't planned. It just happened." Ms. Davis stood up for cross-examination, and I could see the predatory gleam in her eyes. "Mr. Patterson, you testified that your wife was frequently absent for work. What kind of work does she do?" "She's in sales." "And how much money did her work bring into your household?" "I don't know exactly." "According to the financial documents, Mrs. Patterson earned approximately $200,000 last year. How much did you earn?" Grant's face reddened. "About $60,000. "So your wife's work, the work you claim neglected your marriage, provided 75% of your household income." "That's not the point." "What is the point, Mr. Patterson? That your wife should have earned less money so you'd feel better about yourself?" Morrison objected, but the damage was done. "Let's talk about this weekend in Aspen," Ms. Davis continued. "The one you charged to your joint credit card. You told your wife it was for work, correct?" "Yes." "But it was actually a romantic getaway with her sister." Grant mumbled something inaudible. "I'm sorry, could you speak up?" "Yes." "So you lied to your wife about where you were going, spent marital funds on an affair, and then claimed she neglected the marriage?" "It wasn't like that. How was it, Mr. Patterson?" Grant looked around the courtroom desperately, seeking help that wasn't coming. Morrison was frantically shuffling papers, probably trying to figure out how to salvage this disaster. "I made a mistake," Grant said finally. "A mistake that lasted 4 months and cost over $3,000 in marital funds." "Yes." "No further questions." Judge Hendricks called a recess, during which I watched Grant and Morrison have what appeared to be a heated argument in the hallway. When we reconvened, Morrison looked like he'd aged 5 years. "Your Honor, in light of the testimony presented, my client would like to withdraw his request for spousal support and accept a 50-50 split of joint assets, minus the funds spent on the incident in question." I had to bite my lip to keep from smiling. Judge Hendricks looked at both lawyers. "Is this acceptable to both parties?" "Yes, Your Honor," Ms. Davis said smoothly. "Then I'll issue a preliminary ruling. The marriage will be dissolved, with Mrs. Patterson retaining sole ownership of the marital home. Joint assets will be split equally, with Mr. Patterson responsible for reimbursing the marital estate for funds spent on his extramarital affair. Final decree to be issued within 30 days. And just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, Grant tried one last time to salvage something from the wreckage. "Meredith, please, can we talk?" I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. He seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his own poor choices. "There's nothing left to say, Grant. I know I screwed up, but we had something good once. We could try again." "No, we couldn't, because I finally see you clearly, and I don't like what I see." He flinched like I'd slapped him. "You're going to regret this," he said, his voice taking on the petulant tone I'd learned to hate. "You'll end up alone, and you'll remember what you gave up." I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in years. "Grant, I gave up a cheating husband and a lying sister. Trust me, I'm not going to regret that." I walked away from him and toward my car, where Ms. Davis was waiting. "How does it feel?" she asked. "Like I can finally breathe again." But as I drove home, I realized Grant was right about one thing. I was going to remember what I gave up, the constant anxiety, the feeling that I was never good enough, the exhaustion of being married to someone who saw my success as a personal attack on his masculinity. I was going to remember all of it, and I was going to be grateful it was over. 3 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I put the house on the market. The real estate agent, a sharp woman named Patricia, who specialized in upscale suburban properties, was confident we'd have offers within days. "It's a seller's market," she assured me, as we walked through the rooms I'd once thought would be my forever home. Maple Grove Estates is still desirable despite the recent drama. That's what my marriage had become, neighborhood gossip, a cautionary tale told over coffee and book club meetings. "Any particular timeline you're working with?" Patricia asked. "As soon as possible. I've accepted a position in Seattle." It wasn't entirely true. I'd been offered a position in Seattle, one I'd been considering even before Grant's betrayal. Now it felt like destiny rather than coincidence. The house sold in 4 days for $20,000, over asking price to a young couple from California who didn't know about the neighborhood's recent entertainment. I felt a little guilty taking their money for what would inevitably become known as the cheating house, but not guilty enough to turn down their offer. Grant, meanwhile, had been forced to move in with his parents after the motel asked him to leave. According to neighborhood gossip, which reached me through Tina, who had become my unofficial intelligence network, he was sleeping in his childhood bedroom and working part-time at a computer repair shop. Eleanor had resigned from the HOA presidency in shame and barely left her house anymore. Walter, who had always been the more reasonable of Grant's parents, had apparently told his son that he was disappointed but not surprised by his choices. I should have felt satisfied. I should have been ready to move on, start fresh in Seattle, leave all this suburban drama behind. Instead, I felt restless, incomplete. Grant had gotten off too easy. The realization hit me as I was packing my home office, carefully wrapping the awards and certificates that represented years of hard work. Grant had lost his marriage and his living situation, but he still had his job, his friends, his sense that he was the victim in all this. That needed to change. I called Tina. "I need a favor. Name it." "Remember Doug Martinez, Grant's work buddy? The one who looks like a discount Chris Hemsworth and thinks he's God's gift to women? That's him. I need you to ask him out." Silence. Then, "Meredith, I love you, but I have standards." "Not for real, just for information. Take him to dinner, get him talking about Grant, record the conversation." "What are you looking for?" "Anything I can use. Grant's been telling everyone that I'm the villain in this story. I want to know what he's really been saying." "And if Doug doesn't have anything useful? Then we create something useful." 2 days later, Tina called me back, barely able to contain her laughter. "Oh my God, Meredith, your ex-husband is even worse than we thought." "What did you find out?" "Doug is a fountain of information when he's trying to impress a woman. Apparently, Grant's been telling everyone that you were controlling and manipulative, that you trapped him in a marriage he didn't want, and that sleeping with Audrey was his way of reclaiming his freedom." My grip tightened on the phone. "What else?" "He's been trying to get Doug to lie for him, say that you were having an affair too. Doug refused, but Grant's been shopping the story around to other people. Anyone believe him? A few people, apparently. Mostly guys from his computer repair job who don't know you. What about his clients?" "That's the interesting part. Doug let slip that Grant's been using his access to client computers to snoop through their personal files. Looking for dirt he can use if anyone gives him trouble." I felt a cold smile spread across my face. "That's illegal. Very illegal. And Doug has proof. Grant bragged about it over beers last week, and Doug recorded it on his phone." "Why would Doug record that?" "Because Doug's not as stupid as he looks. He's been covering his own ass in case Grant tries to drag him down too." Can you get me a copy of that recording? Already sent it to your email. I hung up and opened my laptop, downloading the audio file Tina had sent. Grant's voice came through clearly, slurred with alcohol, but unmistakably him. You wouldn't believe the shit people keep on their computers, man. This one guy, total straight-laced accountant type, had like $1,000 in gambling debts. Another woman had been embezzling from her charity job. It's like having blackmail material just handed to you. Doug's voice. That's really messed up. You can't just go through people's private stuff. Grant laughing. Who's going to stop me? It's not like they know I'm looking. And if anyone ever tries to screw me over, I've got insurance. What about your ex? You got dirt on her? Meredith? Nah, she's boringly clean. That's what made her so insufferable. Miss Perfect with her perfect job and her perfect house. Well, look who's perfect now. I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair. Grant had just handed me everything I needed to destroy him completely. The next morning, I called the computer repair shop where Grant worked. Hi, I'd like to speak to the manager about one of your employees. Is there a problem with service? You could say that. I have evidence that one of your technicians has been illegally accessing customer data and using it for personal gain. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in the manager's office, playing Doug's recording. The manager, a tired-looking man named Steve, went pale as Grant's voice filled the room. Jesus Christ, he muttered. How many customers could he have done this to? I don't know, but I thought you should be aware before it becomes a legal issue. Legal issue? If your customers find out their privacy was violated, they could sue both Grant and your business. You might want to get ahead of this. Steve thanked me profusely and assured me that Grant would be terminated immediately. He also mentioned that they'd be conducting a full audit of every computer Grant had worked on and contacting customers who might have been affected. Grant would be unemployed by noon and potentially facing criminal charges within the week. But I wasn't done yet. My next call was to Eleanor. Meredith, dear, I'm surprised to hear from you. I wanted to give you a heads up about something before you hear it from someone else. I explained about the recording and Grant's illegal activities, watching through the window as Eleanor's perfect suburban world continued to crumble. He'll probably need a lawyer, I said. A good one. This could be serious. How serious? Computer fraud, invasion of privacy, potentially extortion depending on what he did with the information. Federal charges aren't out of the question. Eleanor was quiet for a long moment. Why are you telling me this? Because despite everything, I don't want to see Grant go to prison. He made terrible choices, but he's not a criminal. Not really. What do you suggest? He needs to disappear for a while, leave town, start over somewhere else, hope the customers don't press charges. And if he stays, then he'll face the consequences of his actions. After I hung up, I poured myself a glass of wine and waited. By evening, Grant's car was gone from his parents' driveway. By the next morning, Eleanor was telling neighbors that her son had taken a job opportunity in another state. I never found out where Grant went, and I didn't care. The important thing was that he was gone, and everyone in Maple Grove Estates knew exactly why. My last week in the neighborhood was peaceful in a way I hadn't experienced in years. The moving truck came and went, taking my furniture to storage until I could find a place in Seattle. I spent my final night in the empty house, listening to the silence and thinking about second chances. The next morning, I loaded my car with the last of my personal belongings and took one final look at the house where my marriage had died. Then I drove away without looking back. Seattle was waiting, and so was the rest of my life. 6 months later, I was settling into my new life in Seattle when the past came calling. I'd found a perfect apartment in Capitol Hill, started my new job with a tech company that appreciated my sales expertise, and was finally beginning to feel like myself again. Then Tina called with news that left me feeling uneasy. Grant's back. I was sitting in my favorite coffee shop, laptop open, working on a presentation for Monday's client meeting. The words hit me like ice water. Back where? Maple Grove. He showed up at his parents' house yesterday, and according to Mrs. Patterson, he's getting his life back together. I closed my laptop slowly. What does that mean? I don't know, but he's been asking about you, where you moved, what you're doing, whether you're seeing anyone. He can't just show up and expect. There's more. He's been telling people that he has evidence you framed him, says he's going to prove you destroyed his life with lies. The familiar cold anger settled in my chest. What kind of evidence? I don't know, but he's scheduled some kind of community meeting for next week. Says he's going to clear his name and expose the truth about what really happened. I stared out the coffee shop window at the Seattle skyline, thinking. Grant had always been predictable in his desperation, but this was bold even for him. Tina, I need you to do something for me. Anything. Find out everything you can about this meeting. When, where, who's invited, and see if Doug still has any other recordings. You're not thinking of going back there, are you? I was already opening my laptop to check flight prices. Grant wants a final showdown? He can have one. 3 days later, I was back in Colorado, staying at a hotel near the airport and planning what I hoped would be the last time I ever had to deal with Grant Patterson. The community meeting was scheduled for Saturday evening at the Maple Grove Community Center, the same place where I'd served him with divorce papers 6 months earlier. According to Tina's intelligence network, Grant had invited everyone who cared about truth and justice to hear his side of the story. About 30 people showed up, a mix of neighbors, former friends, and what appeared to be Grant's new girlfriend, a young woman who looked barely out of college and gazed at him with the kind of adoring expression that suggested she believed every word he said. I slipped in through the back door, just as Grant was beginning his presentation, taking a seat in the shadows where I could see everything without being noticed. Grant looked better than he had during the divorce proceedings. He'd gotten a haircut, was wearing a decent suit, and had clearly been practicing his speech. He stood at the front of the room with a laptop connected to a projector, every inch the wronged man seeking justice. "Thank you all for coming," he began. "I know many of you have heard stories about what happened between Meredith and me. Tonight, I want to share the truth." He clicked to his first slide, a photo of our wedding day, both of us smiling and young and hopeful. This is how our story began. 2 people in love, ready to build a life together. But what you didn't see was what happened behind closed doors. The next slide showed a calendar marked with red X's. These are the days Meredith was traveling for work in our final year of marriage. 147 days. That's more than a third of the year. Murmurs from the audience. Grant was playing to their sympathies, painting himself as the neglected husband. I tried to be supportive. I understood that her career was important, but when I needed her most, she wasn't there. He clicked to the next slide, a photo of himself in a hospital bed. This was taken last February when I had emergency surgery for appendicitis. Meredith was in Phoenix on business. She didn't come home. That was a lie. I'd been in Denver, not Phoenix, and I'd driven straight to the hospital the moment I got his call. I'd stayed with him for 3 days until he was released, but the audience didn't know that. I was lonely, isolated, and frankly, depressed. When Audrey started coming around to check on me, it felt like someone finally cared. More murmurs, these more sympathetic. I'm not proud of what happened next. I made a terrible mistake, but I was emotionally abandoned by my wife, and I was vulnerable. He clicked to the next slide, and my breath caught. It was a photo of me at a restaurant, sitting across from a man I didn't immediately recognize. This was taken 3 weeks before Meredith caught me with Audrey. She was having dinner with her ex-boyfriend Marcus Webb in Denver. Marcus Webb. I remembered now, he was a client, not an ex-boyfriend. We'd had dinner to discuss his company's software needs, but from the angle of the photo, it could easily look intimate. She set me up, Grant continued, his voice growing stronger. She knew about Audrey and me, and instead of confronting me directly, she orchestrated that whole scene with our parents. She wanted to humiliate me, destroy my reputation, and take everything I had. The audience was murmuring more loudly now, some people nodding along with Grant's narrative. She used her position and her money to hire expensive lawyers, manipulate the legal system, and paint me as the villain. But the real villain is the woman who destroyed our marriage and then destroyed my life for revenge. He clicked to his final slide, a photo of our house with a sold sign in front. She took our home, our future, everything we built together, and then she disappeared, leaving me to deal with the consequences of her lies. Grant closed his laptop and looked out at the audience. I'm not asking for your pity. I'm asking for your understanding. I made mistakes, but I was set up by a woman who cared more about winning than about truth. The applause was scattered but real. Grant had told a compelling story, one that painted him as the victim of a calculating, career-obsessed wife. It was time for my rebuttal. I stood up and walked toward the front of the room, my heels clicking on the linoleum floor. The audience turned to look at me, and I heard several gasps of recognition. Grant's face went white. What are you doing here? I heard you were telling stories about me, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the room. I thought I should set the record straight. You have no right. Actually, I have every right, especially when you're lying about me to our former neighbors. I pulled out my phone and connected it to the projector, replacing Grant's presentation with my own. Let's talk about truth, Grant. You showed them a photo of me having dinner with a man you called my ex-boyfriend, Marcus Webb. Here's the contract I signed with Marcus's company the next day for a $2 million software implementation. The contract appeared on screen, clearly showing Marcus Webb as the CEO of Webb Technologies and me as the sales representative for my company. Business dinner, not romantic rendezvous. Grant's girlfriend looked confused. Several audience members shifted uncomfortably. You talked about me being absent during your appendicitis surgery. Here are the hospital visitor logs showing I was there for 3 days straight. I'd gotten the records from the hospital's patient services department, along with photos of the flowers I'd brought and the get well cards I'd organized from our friends. You mentioned being emotionally abandoned. Here are the text messages you sent me during that time period. Grant's messages appeared on screen. Having a great week. Don't worry about me, focus on your work. Audrey stopped by to check on me, such a sweetheart. You're the best wife ever. Can't wait for you to get home. The room was completely silent now. And finally, let's talk about your illegal activities at the computer repair shop. I played Doug's recording, Grant's voice filling the room as he bragged about violating customer privacy and using personal information for blackmail. When it ended, I looked out at the audience. Grant didn't lose his job because I framed him. He lost it because he committed crimes. He didn't leave town because I destroyed his reputation. He left because he was facing potential federal charges. Grant was shaking now, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling around him. I didn't set him up or manipulate anyone. I simply made sure that everyone knew the truth about what kind of man Grant Patterson really is. I disconnected my phone and faced Grant directly. You want to talk about truth? Here's the truth. You cheated on me with my sister for 4 months. You lied about it, stole from our joint accounts to fund your affair, and then tried to blame me for your choices. When that didn't work, you committed crimes and fled town rather than face the consequences. That's not... Grant started. I'm not finished. My voice cut through his protest like a blade. You came back here tonight to lie about me, to try to rehabilitate your image by destroying mine. But the only person who destroyed Grant Patterson was Grant Patterson. I looked around the room one final time. I moved to Seattle 6 months ago and started a new life. I was happy to leave all this behind. But if you ever lie about me again, if you ever try to contact me or interfere in my life, I will make sure that everyone you meet for the rest of your life knows exactly who you are and what you've done. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Oh, and Grant, that young woman you brought tonight, she deserves better than a man who blames everyone else for his problems. I hope she's smart enough to figure that out before you destroy her life too. I left the community center to complete silence, got in my rental car, and drove straight to the airport. On the plane back to Seattle, I finally felt the closure I'd been seeking. Grant could tell whatever stories he wanted to whoever would listen, but the truth was out there now, documented and witnessed. I was free. 2 years later, I was standing in my Seattle kitchen, preparing dinner for my book club, when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Tina's number, and I answered with a smile. Please tell me you're calling with ridiculous neighborhood gossip. Oh, I have gossip, Tina said, but it's not ridiculous. It's actually kind of perfect. I put her on speaker and continued chopping vegetables. I'm listening. Grant's back in the news. My knife paused mid-chop. What kind of news? The good kind. He got arrested in Phoenix for identity theft and fraud. Apparently, he's been running some kind of online scam, using stolen personal information to open credit cards. Seriously. Absolutely serious. It made the local paper and everything. Eleanor's beside herself. Apparently, she'd been sending him money every month, thinking he was getting his life together. I resumed chopping, processing this information. How long is he looking at? If convicted, 5 to 10 years according to the article. And Audrey? Living in California with some yoga instructor she met at a retreat. Posted on Instagram last week about finding her authentic self through spiritual cleansing. She looks like she's gained about 30 pounds and dyed her hair purple. Despite everything, I felt a twinge of something that might have been sympathy. Audrey had always been searching for something she couldn't name, bouncing from one identity to another like a pinball. You know what the weirdest part is? Tina continued. I don't think I hate them anymore. Really? Really? Grant's clearly a sociopath who would have destroyed your life if you'd stayed married to him. And Audrey, she's just weak. She always has been. In a weird way, they did you a favor. I looked around my kitchen, taking in the warm lighting, the plants on the windowsill, the photos of friends and colleagues that had replaced the formal wedding portraits that used to dominate my old house. You might be right about that. So what's new with you? Still dating that architect? David? Yeah, we're good. Really good, actually. Define really good. I smiled, thinking about David's easy laugh, his complete lack of insecurity about my career success, the way he'd insisted on cooking dinner for my book club because he wanted to meet my friends. He proposed last weekend. Tina shrieked so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. What? When? How? Why didn't you call me immediately? I wanted to think about it for a few days. Think about it. What's to think about? He's gorgeous, he's successful, he worships the ground you walk on, and he makes you laugh. What more do you need? I needed to make sure I was saying yes for the right reasons. And I said yes this morning. Another shriek. I'm flying out there right now. We're going dress shopping and ring shopping and... Tina, breathe. We're thinking about a small ceremony next fall. Nothing fancy. Nothing fancy. After everything you've been through, you deserve a fairy tale wedding. I laughed, thinking about my first wedding, the elaborate ceremony, the expensive dress, the reception that had cost more than some people's cars. All that money and effort for a marriage that had been built on lies and mutual misunderstanding. I had fancy the first time. This time, I just want real. After I hung up with Tina, I finished preparing dinner and set the table for 8. My book club had evolved from a casual group of work acquaintances into some of my closest friends, women who'd supported me through the divorce, celebrated my career successes, and welcomed David into our circle without judgment or drama. At 7 o'clock, they started arriving with bottles of wine and homemade desserts, filling my apartment with laughter and conversation. We spent an hour discussing the month's book selection, a mystery novel about a woman who fakes her own death to escape an abusive marriage, before the conversation inevitably turned to my engagement news. "Let me see the ring," demanded Sarah, my neighbor from down the hall. I held out my left hand, showing off the simple but elegant solitaire David had chosen. It was nothing like the flashy diamond Grant had given me. This one was smaller, more delicate, but somehow more beautiful. "It's perfect," said Jennifer, one of my colleagues. "Very you." "Tell us about the proposal," added Lisa, the group's romantic. I settled back in my chair with my wine glass, remembering. We were hiking up at Mount Rainier, and we stopped at this overlook with an incredible view of the city. David started talking about how much his life had changed since we met, how I'd made him want to be a better person. "Oh my God, that's so sweet," Lisa sighed. Then he said he had something he wanted to ask me, and I thought he was going to suggest we move in together or something. When he got down on one knee, I was completely shocked. "What did you say?" I said, "Are you sure?" Which probably wasn't the most romantic response. Everyone laughed. "What did he say to that?" He said, "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. You're the strongest, smartest, most incredible woman I've ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me." The room went quiet for a moment, the kind of satisfied silence that comes after hearing something genuinely beautiful. "That's a man who knows what he has," Sarah said finally. "And appreciates it," added Jennifer. As the evening wound down and my friends began to leave, I found myself thinking about the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 years ago, I'd been trapped in a marriage that was slowly suffocating me, too afraid of failure to admit that I'd made a mistake. Grant's betrayal had shattered my carefully constructed life, but it had also freed me from a future that would have been built on compromise and quiet desperation. I'd learned that I was stronger than I'd ever imagined, that I could survive betrayal and humiliation and come out better on the other side. I'd discovered that I didn't need a man to complete me, which made choosing to be with David feel like a gift rather than a necessity. The glass shards that had once filled my hotel room in Denver were gone, swept away by time and distance and the simple act of building something better. As I cleaned up the dinner dishes, David called from his business trip in Portland. "How was book club?" "Good. I told them about the engagement." And they're very happy for us. Sarah's already planning the bachelorette party." "Should I be worried?" "Probably." He laughed, and I felt that familiar warmth that came from being with someone who truly understood me. "I miss you," he said. "I miss you too. But you'll be home tomorrow." "Can't wait." After we hung up, I poured myself one last glass of wine and stepped out onto my balcony. Seattle spread out below me, lights twinkling in the darkness like earthbound stars. Somewhere out there, Grant was sitting in a jail cell, finally facing real consequences for his choices. Somewhere else, Audrey was probably posting inspirational quotes on social media while searching for her next identity. And here I was, in a city I loved, with a career I was proud of, and a man who saw my success as something to celebrate rather than compete with. I raised my glass to the night sky, toasting the woman I'd become and the life I'd built from the ashes of my old one. "Here's to second chances," I said to the darkness. Then I went inside, locked the door behind me, and got ready for tomorrow.